Hey, what's going on, guys? This is our first draft analysis of the Swiss stage, featuring our very first two teams entering the ring. So we've got Team Liquid here on the right side, LCS number 3 seed, versus, of course, fan favorite T1, the five gods here. The draft just finished, and as of the time of recording, we're still in the middle of the game, but the philosophies of the draft are basically established at this point. I think T1 especially have a really good grasp. Just a little bit of a spoiler here, they have a really good grasp of what the actual draft dynamics of the patch should be, what champions should be prioritized. Up until this point in the play-ins, we've really been seeing sort of like a different draft priority. A lot of emphasis on things like the Xayah Rakan. Honestly, I don't think too much reason, and there's a lot of other things that people are just going for, and because people don't really know what's good, right? So a lot of these things are just going to be based off research, based off what their scouts are telling them, their analysts are presenting, and what works in scrims. So as a result, obviously it's going to be a different caliber of play when you get to the Swiss stage, and there's a lot of good picks here that are pretty much going to establish what the meta is going to be actually supposed to be like. Really quickly before we get into pick ban here, if you enjoy content like this, just feel free to give me your perspective on how the draft goes and stuff like that, because draft is super subjective, of course. And yeah, so we're about to hop into game here. Let's get to where the draft starts. All right, so draft kicks off here. As suspected, T1's essential lose condition is allowing APA to get comfortable, right? That is the key factor for this team. This is the main reason that this team became from a bottom tier LCS team to one that is able to actually compete with the best. So clearly, when the game is played on APA's terms, it's going to be successful. That's what T1 is clearly choking out here in the first phase, along with a random Kalista ban, of course, but that's probably from scrim information, probably counter to what they're potentially going to pick. Caitlyn is something that's actually been coming up on the up and up for a lot of reasons. Just having that perma priority, that blind ability in a lot of matchups is going to be really annoying. The Poppy is probably a preparation for their R1, R2, as well as the Azir. So very classic take here is the Orianna that T1 does opt for in the end. It's just really strong B1. It's super blindable. It works in pretty much every single comp in the game right now. Like, there's no reason not to really go for it, right? You should just hedge your cards. By picking this, understand that T1 is effectively showing nothing. They're like, all right, we just picked a mid laner that will work in every single comp and will hedge against every single matchup. That is the point of these early phases in draft, right? Very common pick here. Classic matchup is going to be the Syndra into it. It's shifted a little bit in terms of the lane identity because Syndra got reworked. Common pick here will be the Lee Sin for the 2v2 potential. That's what TL is going for here. Other picks could have worked, but it's really hard to say. I'd say Lee Sin's one of the most blindable champions in terms of jungle on the draft, and I agree with this, right? You have the Syndra lockdown. You want to set them up, have a strong mid jungle 2v2. This is where the draft gets interesting, of course. His Jarvan pick's a little troll. They are not going for this. It's a little so the reason for this Jarvan pick not being viable here, by the way, is that one, it's a bad matchup into the Lee Sin, and it's also not really revealed how they really want to be playing the comp right now. So it's not good to be picking it on 2-3. What is good on 2-3 and in general, in my opinion, is the Ashe. So completely different from everything in play-ins so far, right? We haven't seen it played once, but as of this patch 13.19, it's extremely powerful. Think of all the strongest champions you're seeing right now. Xayah, Kai'Sa, maybe a bit of... That's actually pretty much it, right? There's really not many other champions. Like, if we go around... If we go here... Sorry, I'll go back to 13.19. Like, it's actually very diverse. And there's a lot of good champions that can be played. It just shouldn't be these ones, right? It really shouldn't just be Xayah, Kai'Sa permanently. It makes sense why these teams are going for it with the Xayah Rakan priority, and maybe it feels good in scrims, but especially the Kai'Sa, There's just too much diversity in bottom lane right now that you are just gonna get edged out with a terrible matchup, or there's just so much more flexibility. So there's no reason to really be hedging yourself into not having any options at this point in the game, right? Top lane is very rigid, I would say, in comparison. It's just Renekton, K'Sante, maybe some tanks, a bit of Jace here and there, right? Nothing special, I would say. Jungle is also very inflexible on this patch because of the needs for CC and just facilitator champions. So we're just going to continue to see Lee Sin, Sejuani, Maokai, things of that nature. Like, nothing is going to change, right? Mid lane, same thing. A lot of control mages, maybe some more diversity, but I think that's going to be what's happening. AD and support is the area of the most contention, right? And in draft, you want to push these most flexible roles further back, except in the case of a champion like Ashe, because Ashe has an excellent matchup spread against all of these champions. You want the best blindable champions are champions that have great matchup spreads and work in a lot of compositions. This is the case for both Orianna in B1 and then Ashe in B2. So those are arguably, at least in my opinion, the best 2 in slot champions for both of their roles right now. There's no counter to Ashe in this meta for Worlds. There's nothing. And you can even tell by the numbers here. Look at all these counter picks. This is obviously just narrow logic, but in terms of a competitive stage, her natural champion identity plays around her high range and being able to just threaten a lot of stuff in lane, right? And you can even blind the Ashe by itself, because if they counter with a lot of engage, which is typically Ashe's weakness, then you can hedge with things like Renata, or you can pick other enchanters, or you can pick Braum. In this case, they actually decide to blind Renata with it, because they find it more valuable to save jungle for phase 2, and of course top for phase 2 is probably pretty normal. So because of this, I actually thought about this for a little bit. It sounds a little bit weird to immediately pair with a champion like Renata, because Renata is not that blindable in terms of the enchanter spread pool, but it sounds like T1 is confident that that's not what TL is going to play. And actually, it's not even bad to get counterpicked by enchanters here in this case, because it does give Ashe priority in the lane in the end eventually. Unless the only lane that would completely stomp this T1 lane, in my opinion, would probably be Ezreal Karma, which is actually another decent lane. Instead, TL respond with Aphelios, which is basically handshaking that they're going to lose lane, and they're just going to try to outscale. It's really, like, out of all the picks that they could have gone for, this is probably not the one I would have really swung for, but it is what it is, right? Their only other options would probably be to R3 top and shield 2 bans, or to just pick a different ADC. And really, there's not too many options, so I don't really... It doesn't feel good, but there should have been... I think there might have been more optimal picks in this case. Because they show Aphelios now, they're naturally going to ban Jarvan, because Jarvan is still open on phase 2. It just counters both their mid laner and both sources of their damage, and it's clearly not ideal. T1 ban Kennen here as a potential response. They just don't want Summit to be hedging against this weak side ability really well, and it might be something from scrims as well. Blitzcrank is an interesting take in terms of the bans. They're just probably hedging for matchup, but the main thing to be looking out for here is that T1 has a really good FTB, or front to back comp already, and TL already has their source of power through mid jungle. Both comps are still relatively flexible, and I will commend both teams for this. And this is where I would say on this 4th pick that TL ran into some issues. Renata's entire identity revolves around this idea that she's a blindable enchanter because she does well into these engaged champions. So CoreJJ decides to just go for it anyway. The mindset behind this, we can't just knock CoreJJ's ability to understand this, right? So the logic behind this potentially would be that they still really need a source of power in the bottom side, so they need to pick priority bottom lanes. Rel would probably still secure priority in the early phases, at least in the middle, bits, but this is pretty hard for them to play overall as the game progresses. It's also especially reinforced when T1 locks Jace here on R5, because by Rel being picked on 4 here, it basically tells T1 that they're going to weak side top. Blinding Jace is usually not that allowed against a comp like this that TL has, because you can pick forward counter picks, but because they've revealed this and they understand that TL has to play weak side top, it's really hard for them to actually answer, because they can't afford to spread the resources that thin. Pyosik already has to worry about mid, or he has to worry about hand holding bot side as well, just to punish this T1 lane potentially, and it's just too much work. So that's why overall this draft is extremely hard to play for TL, especially as the game goes on more and more. The reason for this is because they have even or winning lanes across the board, and they can play for scaling because their champions simply have the output for it, as well as range advantage through Jace, which is a natural scaling advantage that a lot of teams don't consider. Because of this, what TL has to do in order to win the game is play for engage and cause chaos within the game. However, look at the T1 comp. It's literally fully hedged already to deal with this. This is why this is really hard for TL to play. So the takeaway here is that even 1 or 2 picks that can cause problems for your draft like this can be what makes the draft really hard for teams to play. A lot of the times, like, although gameplay does matter, and don't get me wrong, it's very important to understand how the game works, but it's important as a coaching staff to set your team up for the right scenarios as well. And in this case, I don't think this was quite the situation they wanted from TL. It was actually a decent draft, especially in the first phase, but it seems like the difference in priorities is what T1 and rather the understanding of what's meta, it granted T1 the advantage in this game. So hopefully that provided some context for you guys on this draft. Let me know if you have any comments or anything like that, and I'll catch you in the next one.